Originally the unions were organized actually to maintain white labor, because you have to remember in the South, you had a lot of skilled labor, i.e., black folks who were suddenly being freed, and you had all these white folks who wanted to maintain power. So you had a lot of these unions forming out of that, and as black folks began to build power, there was a struggle within that. And then if you look at the Great Depression and that whole era, that definitely gave rise to tension. But also, even before the Great Depression, you have to look at World War II. When we look at the Russian Revolution in 1917, I think we forget that you know this country had came very close to going the way of Russia, and there was a lot of push and pull, not to do that. And that's why, around the rest of the world, we don't, in most of the countries around the world, at least in a lot of the developed world, they celebrate, May Day as a holiday. And even in the country that was developed, i.e., the United States, we don't. But I think just going back to that history, considering that, we didn't see battle, on the home front here in the States except Pearl Harbor, and we didn't see any real battle here in the States during World War One. But yet these other countries did. The fighting was happening right on their soil. So their people understood the importance of coming together in solidarity firsthand, because you had people literally being, murdered. You had families that had been wiped out. So I think there's definitely a whole generational arc that has been formed, really since World War II, and has led us to where we are. And I think it's important knowing that, because, I would argue, since even though I wasn't alive during this point, but really since Reagan came in 1980, we've really been on the right wing trajectory as a country. And I'm pretty sure those of you on the call who were alive, you can, give your feedback on that. But we've really been on the right wing trajectory. And what are you talking about? Labor, even movements such as the labor movement, and even the anti-war movement, we've noticed a steady decline, because again, it's not really taught in schools. If you notice, they don't really talk about labor in schools, so most people don't even know what a union is. And I'm not sure if any of you were taught about unions, but I know I wasn't really taught extensively about unions in school, and I grew up in the Northeast where unions are pretty prevalent. So I think really when we talk about the whole systemic aspect, and I really want to touch on what Latasha was talking about, with talking about the babies, and as well as Bakura, because those of y'all don't know, me and Bakura both, I'm the second vice president for the Criminal Justice Reform Network. So just dealing with the kids, when we talk about the next generation, they're not being taught what needs to be taught in these schools. And many of us weren't taught what was needed to be taught. So that's why we have a lot of ignorance when it comes to what is MMT, or, being able to have a union, all these things. So that's how these structural injustices are able to exist. And a lot of us aren't really being brought to awareness of these injustices until well into adulthood. So I really think part of what we can do, and I think this really links into a lot of the work that both Latasha and Bakura are doing, on the youth side, dealing with the kids, well, mainly trying to keep, particularly with Bakura's organization, with child welfare, is making sure that the kids aren't being snatched and put into this unjust system, dealing with CPS and unjustly taking kids from their parents. But even besides that, making sure that they have the right education and are being taught how to, become, productive adults with the right knowledge. Because, Holly, I think a lot of what you're touching on, I don't think a lot of people really do have a true understanding of MMT and what it really means. I think people may think they get it, but I think we have to really look at the miseducation that's happened for generations, and where, not just my generation, but, the one before me and the one before that, and the consistency of it, and, the other side's consistency as far as pushing the narrative. And, I said in my presentation earlier, I don't like using the term right to work, because it frames the narrative from the perspective of the I said it's Orwellian because it frames narrative under a false pretense that these laws are actually pro workers and that's protecting the workers when they're the exact opposite. But they're able to do that because they know that we don't know. Most of us haven't been taught and don't know the real history and the past and current context of it. So I think really just to really bring it full circle, I think really getting down to the education piece and really each one teach one, but especially, for those y'all, who have kids, really starting early so that they can, already be at knowing what it is that a lot of us learn as adults at square one. So I really want to end it off at that, kind of really bringing it full circle because I think knowledge is power, but it also has to be applied and it also has to be spread. So I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway. Even looking at the election, because a lot of people, even when it comes to voting, we tend to vote for who's the most popular, who we see, but not necessarily who we align with the most on the issues. Even if we don't agree with the person 100% of the time, at least being able to explain, okay, why are we standing with this person, and not just voting because they have a D next to their name. So with that, I know it's already well past 10 o'clock, but I just felt like that needed, to really be said because I think there's a lot missing. I think not having that historical context, it's easier to think, just to wonder how we got here and, kind of sitting in limbo, um, not realizing that these conditions have been well planned out, for decades. So with that, I yield the floor.